Welcome to the on-record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Andrew Sorgel. With me today is our on and off the track resident horse expert, Ann Russek. Ann, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, let's start. How did you end up at the Pink Cadillac Diner? Or rather, how did the Pink Cadillac Diner end up in Rockbridge County at Natural Bridge? Because it was originally in Greenville, correct?
Yes, that's right. Well, my husband and I, Stephen, we moved here about 20 years ago now. And Steve had a restaurant in Colts Neck, New Jersey, and I, of course, was involved with the racehorses. So we were looking for a location where we could have a farm, and that Steve would still be, he was actually moving here to scale down. He thought that he would originally maybe do a bagel shop, you know, College Town or something like that. But as fate would have it, we didn't really find anything that ever, you know, fit our niche. And the Pink Cadillac had actually been originated, as you said, in Greenville by Ken Pitkin, who coincidentally enough, he and his wife were also involved in horses. And so he and she had started the restaurant, but they had never done a restaurant before, and it was literally driving them both crazy, as anybody in the restaurant business could tell you. And so we purchased it from them on a 2-year lease option to buy, and then as fate would have it, Pilot's truck stop knocked on our door one day and said, "We need this land to put a truck stop in, so you know, we want to buy you out." And the location for the Pink Cadillac happened to have been empty for several years, so it was a great, you know, it was a great change.
Now, how's business out there? Because that's not quite at Natural Bridge, not quite in Lexington. Is business still pretty steady? Do you still get a fair amount of people out there as compared to Greenville?
Yes, both locations were very good business locations, but I have to say that the Natural Bridge location has actually gone above our wildest expectations. And I attribute that primarily, obviously, because of its interstate access, but more importantly to our very good business neighbors, the Safari Park, the Natural Bridge Zoo, and the Natural Bridge itself. Because, as you know, at that end of the county, that is what's at the end of the county. And fortunately for us as an eating establishment, we really are the only game in town. And we have a good relationship with all of those business owners. And so, you know, it's just kind of a natural that if you go to any of those locations or attractions, you know, when they're all, you know, their help is all going to say, looking for some place to eat, you know, go to the Pink Cadillac.
Absolutely.
So.
Switching gears a little bit.
Sure.
Let's get back into the horses now. When did you really get into horses? What really first piqued your interest? Describe your history with the horse world a little bit.
Well, I don't even know if I could tell you when I first got interested in horses, for the simple reason it just feels that I always loved them. I mean, I was that little girl who, when I was really small, my father was in the service, and we lived in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And I can remember, my earliest recollections are the the horse in front of the grocery stores. I mean, they don't do that so much anymore, but in my day, every grocery store had a horse, and you put the nickel in probably at those days, and you rode. And so basically, instead of going shopping with my mom or my dad, especially with my dad, I would just have some nickels, and I would just ride that horse in front of that store until he was tired. And then he was, he was transferred to Alaska, Fort Richardson. And I can remember we drove there from North Carolina, and I can really remember at that time, I think I was 6 at the time, but I was devastated because I was quite sure that I was never going to see another horse again for the rest of my life. And pretty much the 4 years we were there, I didn't see any horses, but I continued to read about them and want them. And then he was transferred to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey when I was 9, going on 10. And once again, I was disappointed because after 4 years in Alaska, I was quite certain that the only place that there were horses was in Texas. So we weren't going to Texas, so I knew my life was over. And, but we got to New Jersey, and much to my amazement, we moved to a beautiful county, Monmouth County, which was actually known for its horses, and it was also the home of Monmouth Park Racetrack. And so I had horses as a young girl, and it was just, you know, it was always my passion. And, you know, in high school, everybody else wanted to go to football. I just always wanted to be at the barn, always wanted to be at the stables. And then when I was 16, I went to the racetrack and got my first job walking horses.
Now, is that when you started to get into the racehorse world? What piqued your interest in rescuing a lot of these off-the-track thoroughbred horses?
Well, that happened much later. When I first went on the racetrack, like I said, I was 16 years old. It was a summertime job. I walked horses, and actually, I'm 59 years old, so you do the math. So when I was 16, that was the cusp of when women were actually coming on the racetrack. There was very, very few women. And so I was just in heaven that I was actually being paid to be around horses. You know, I can honestly say that at that point, much to my parents' disappointment, any thoughts I ever had of seriously going to college were, I mean, I knew, it was like Toby Tyler with the circus. I knew where I was going. I was going with the racetrack. And so I ended up marrying into the family that I first worked for. So when I was 16, I was hired by W.A. Kroll Jr., and then I ended up marrying his son, Bill. And so for many years, it was just, you know, I was involved with the racetrack. I never even knew that these horses needed rescuing until about 7 years ago.
Really? And what turned your interest onto that?
Well, I was here in Virginia. I'd already, you know, relocated from New Jersey to Virginia, and I just happened to be reading an agricultural magazine, and there was an article in there about a bill. It was H.R. 503, and it was the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act. And I started reading it. It had just been introduced into Congress, and there in the article was the number of thoroughbred racehorses that go to slaughter every year, and you could have knocked me over with a feather. I had no idea.
Oh my gosh. Any idea how much was 20%, 30%? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, it was 20%. That's absolutely 20%? Right. It was 20%. Mm-hmm. The majority of horses that went to slaughter, and still the majority of horses that go to slaughter, are quarter horses. But thoroughbreds were, you know, certainly right up there.
Now, describe what happens to these horses after their racing careers are over. Is slaughter kind of the first go-to, or what has happened before these thoroughbred horse shows were such a huge?
Okay, well, the answer to your question is I would have to say that before I knew about slaughter, in the ideal situation, what happens to these horses when they're done racing is if they're mares, they go to the breeding sheds. And if they're a good stallion or a colt or whatever, then of course they also go to the breeding shed. After that, it's pretty much, yes, anybody's guess. Very, very, very few of them were actually retired or moved into careers as show horses or anything. What really happened was they didn't go directly from certain racetracks to the slaughterhouse. It's a trickle-down effect. You have your premier racetracks such as Belmont, Churchill, Gulfstream Park, Santa Anita, you know, all the ones that you see on TV. And then you have these lower level tracks such as Penn National, even Charlestown, Mountaineer Park. They're all across the country. When a horse stopped being competitive at one of these premier tracks, then those trainers would sell the horse to a trainer at one of the lesser tracks. But there's so many levels of the lesser tracks that you just keep going down and down and down, so that by the time you get to the really bottom of the barrel tracks, you're in a situation where the guy that owns the horse probably doesn't even have enough money to pay his bills, and so, you know, you go off to an auction, a slaughter auction. Okay,
and now slaughterhouses are illegal in the U.S. Is it Mexico and Canada mostly?
Right. What happened was the bill, even though there was overwhelming support for H.R. 503 6 years ago, the bill has always been held up in Congress because as you know, favorite trick of our legislators is to not let a bill out to be voted on in the first place. So it's always held up in committee. And so I've actually lost track here. What did the...
I asked where the horses went for slaughter because it is illegal.
Oh yes,
in the US.
I'm sorry. And so what happened was the way they closed down the American slaughterhouses, there was only 3 of them, was that an appropriations bill, USDA, even though the meat is all exported to Europe and overseas, you do have to have a USDA inspector in the actual slaughter facility. So what the appropriations bill did was it stopped the funding for the USDA inspectors, which in turn shut down the slaughterhouses. So now the horses do, yes, they go to either Mexico or Canada.
Okay. Now, can you talk a little bit about the horse show from this past weekend, the Virginia Thoroughbred Celebration? Can you talk a little bit about how long that's been going on, you know, a brief history of that, and what the mission of those horse shows are?
Okay, the Thoroughbred Celebration Horse Show actually, when I first got involved with the slaughter horse bill, I actually did travel to these slaughterhouses, these auctions rather, to see for myself. Like I said, as I said before, I couldn't believe it, so I really wanted to know what was going on. And it was absolutely so much worse than anything I ever could have imagined. And I spent quite a bit of time with a lot of other people that were also invested in this, rescuing these horses and trying to rehome them. And then I decided that we were rescuing a lot of horses, and more facilities were starting to pop up that were taking these horses in, but a lot of them were still very, very salvageable. And so it's the old cliche, you know, we needed a venue, we needed a reason for people to want to adopt these horses and turn them into show horses. And so that was when I decided to approach the Virginia Horse Center to see about putting on some off-the-track thoroughbred shows.
And now is it tri-annual event? Is there fall,
there's
spring, summer?
Three of them, yes. There's
okay.
One in March, one in June, and one in November.
Okay. Okay, well, and I think we are just about out of time here. This has been the on-record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Andrew Sorgel. This again is Ann Russek. Thanks for stopping by.